Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Cyber Essentials for UK SMEs. I'm Joy, I'm from Intelliworx, and I am joined by Jack and Alex today, who will be speaking to us a bit later. We're glad that you could join us, and we'll hope it'll be useful and informative for you all. I will introduce you to our speakers. So today we have Alex from Crayon, who has kindly joined us. He'll be sharing his expertise in cybersecurity and guiding us through some of the key aspects of keeping your business secure. Then we'll hear from Jack from Huntress. He will provide us with some practical tips and strategies for tackling cybersecurity challenges that we face today. So we will have a quick look at the agenda for today. We've really jumped right into things, so let's go. So we'll first talk about the importance of cybersecurity. Then we'll go on to talking about understanding the fundamentals, the essentials. Then we'll hop into some real-world scenarios, building a cybersecurity plan, some really practical outworkings, and then we'll head into the Q&A. Throughout the webinar, feel free to post your questions in the chat in the Q&A section, in the chat or the Q&A section throughout the webinar. Anytime you have a question come up, you can just have it sit there, and then we'll refer to them at the end in our Q&A section and chat through them. Quickly before I hand it off to our speakers, I did just want to give you a little bit of information on who Intelliworx is. If you're not familiar with us and what we do, we're a tech company that's dedicated to helping businesses succeed by providing reliable IT support and solutions. Whether it's maintaining systems, managing network, bolstering cybersecurity, which we're talking about today, we are here to ensure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes so that you guys can focus on actually running your business. We're a global company. Our headquarters, as you can see in this slide, are in Sydney, and we also have locations in Auckland, in Manila in the Philippines, in London, where I'm speaking from today, and then Chicago in the US as well. We believe that technology should enable people and businesses, not burden them. So we're actually really passionate about making sure that the solutions we offer fit the needs to actually integrate into your system. So that's who we are. And then let's get to our speakers today to get the good stuff. So I'll hand it over now to Alex, who's going to walk us through the importance of cybersecurity in today's digital business world. So Alex, take it away for us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Joy. And thank you for the opportunity to present on this webinar. And for everyone who's on the other side, welcome to a very informative session. And yeah, so my name is Alex. Great to meet you. Greetings from beautiful Helsinki, Finland. I'm responsible for Crown Cybersecurity business. And yeah, pretty much what we do is we help customers to build resilient environments based on Microsoft Security Stack, among many other things. It's a 4,000 people company from LSP, or originated from a licensed distributor towards a true value-added partner when it comes to cloud services. We have great partners, but also cybersecurity assessments, managed security services, and data and AI. So be it generative AI, machine learning, machine vision, things like that. Yeah, it's a big organization based in 47 countries. And today, I am to present the, what is the, essentials that are required to have a resilient organization. But before jumping into those, technical controls and capabilities, I think it's good to just pause a little bit and think about why cybersecurity is important. What is the, the place for cybersecurity? What does it drive within the organization? Historically, cybersecurity organizations and cybersecurity responsibilities have been there mainly to minimize risk, and that is still the case. Resilience is a very, very important thing. Typically, resilience is being built based on confidentiality, integrity, availability. Basically, one ensures that you can always trust your systems. Those systems are available and your data is secured, like in a very, very nutshell. However, as time passed, there are other, let's say, streams where cybersecurity plays a key role. And today, one of those streams is compliance. Um, I'm sure that everyone is able or is seeing things in newspapers, company A, B, or C got breached because of X, Y, Z. And it basically means that typically, as we innovate, cybersecurity typically comes as an afterthought, and that typically leads to breaches, and therefore industries, countries, regions have started to build or have already built a lot of laws and regulations around how do you do cybersecurity and how do you manage risk associated with cybersecurity. There are standards that are in place. There are requirements, laws, GDPR. I'm sure everyone has heard. In UK, you have your essentials that are in place if you want to work with the government, for example. But one that is emerging, another stream that is emerging is something called trust. So more and more we see across the globe cybersecurity playing a key role in the sales cycle, surprisingly. So organization A sells something or becomes a supplier for an organization B, and as part of that, let's say negotiation, it's very typical to for the buying organization to require certain capabilities or proof that there are certain capabilities or maturity when it comes to cybersecurity. And those companies that are upfront with it, that are really focusing on cybersecurity as part of their core business, they typically have obviously more chance of success because instead of, like, if you think about from a very use case perspective, instead of figuring out for your first time how to do security management once asked by a customer, typically the result that you have in front of you is not as good as what you would have if you have actually thought of security, and security is part of your core business. You are a responsible supplier, so to speak. And a few examples of those, of these kind of three streams, why they exist. So here's an example from Kone, Finnish company, although global, one of the biggest elevator, escalator manufacturers in the world. There are plenty of Kone elevators in the UK as well. And it's interesting how they are looking at cybersecurity. So from their perspective, they when it comes to elevators and escalators, safety is a very big thing. However, with safety comes security. Once you start connecting devices that carry people to the internet, then obviously security is a very important thing, but you can handle it from a risk management perspective, or it can be your, let's say, competitive advantage to be upfront with security and showcasing that this is part of our DNA. Security, cybersecurity is part of our DNA, just like safety is. And yeah, they are definitely big about security. They're not afraid of actually telling how well they're doing when it comes to cybersecurity. And yeah, they're doing good when it comes to business. Also, if you think about the another way of looking at it as a someone who is part of a supply chain, British Petroleum is actually a very good example. So they have on their webpage, there is a section for cybersecurity supplier, and they have clearly their approach is coming from this kind of risk management perspective. So the bigger supplier are, the more important supplier you are for their core operations, the higher the risk level you you kind of possess for them. Ergo, you have to have more requirements. You have to be more mature. The higher you are up the ladder when it comes to being part of a supply chain for a bigger organization. And sometimes those companies require even going as much as requiring certifications such as SOC 2 Type 2 certifications or ISO 27001, which is a information security management certification. But oftentimes there are lists of 100 plus questions that you need to answer to, which would show your maturity. And reason for this type of, let's say, approach is pretty clear. I think if you would look at one concrete example of when things go bad, it's Marks and Spencer. I'm sure you recognize in the UK. They have been breached just a short while ago. I believe it was April, if I recall correctly. And they have estimated, there was news by BBC a day ago where they claimed that the impact of a cyber attack was 300 million pounds in sales. And it allegedly was a ransomware attack that occurred through a supply chain. So it's not that they were being directly breached, but they were breached through their supply chain. And this is why these type of, let's say, supply chain management or supplier risk management regulations exist. And this is why many companies have been very proactive on creating this type of frameworks like British Petroleum, that if you want to be their supplier, there are certain minimum requirements that you need to fill out. And in all honesty, it's not much that they require, typically, again, depending on how important you are within that supply chain. And oftentimes it is just the essentials that they do require. And again, there are two ways of thinking of it. Cybersecurity as a permission to play, minimizing risk, obeying the law, conforming with regulations, or being proactive and using this as something that builds trust towards your customers. And those essentials are, let's say, I would categorize them into three different, let's say, bigger capabilities or phases. One is something called a security baseline. So in order to be resilient, one typically needs to understand, how does good look like? So based on my business, based on the customers that I'm serving, how would good cybersecurity look like within my organization? What are the controls? What are the processes that I would need to have? And once that is done, once that question is answered, the question is, what are the most foundational things that I require to really get to that kind of about 80% of that how good looks like? The problem I see in the industry nowadays is that no one even asks that first questions, but companies decide to go with these, let's say, technological solutions without actually thinking of, why do you purchase something? Why do you purchase something? And if you don't know why are you doing this, it's very hard to configure those technologies to actually have a proper security baseline. It's very hard to have proper security controls to make sure that you are resilient. The second, let's say, stream of things is something called the drift detection. So once one understands, how does good look like, what are the security controls that I need to have to be resilient, even if I would be attacked, then it's a question of understanding drift. Baselines, consider them as guardrails. They are technical controls that make sure that you are in a situation that your users are let's say, using your solutions correctly, with the right tools. And if they are not, then that gets notified. Or if your IT starts doing something, introducing new technologies without proper security baselines, that would get notified as well. So this is I would call this an early warning system. It's usually misconfigurations, vulnerabilities that need to be treated, or non-compliant usage. And then last but not least, it is the security monitoring. So understanding security events and responding to them, be those, let's say, true incidents or even false positives, but having that capability to see when you're potentially about to be breached or being breached, and then responding to that threat. So understanding how good looks like, an early warning system to avoid breaches, and then also having that strong back foot or last line of defense to be able to spot when your security baseline fails, and then or when attacker is successful or potentially successful, and respond to that in a timely manner. So those are the, I would say, essentials for security resilience. And when you can showcase these three things almost to any vendor, chances are that you will cover a lot of the requirements coming from them, or even from regulations. You will cover a lot of those requirements. By going a little bit deeper, so what are then the actual capabilities? So what are the controls that you need to have in place for let's say those secure baselines? So obviously identity is key. If you are using, for example, Office 365 tools, if you are in the cloud, so to speak, identity is the most important thing. Back in the day, in 2017, I would say the EDR technology is the most important thing, because there were a wave or multiple big waves of ransomware that impacted the entire world. But nowadays, based on statistics, 99% of ransomware gets blocked if the device is managed and it has just a more of a modern EDR in place. However, identity is the most growing attack vector at the moment. So, and if you are cloud native, if you're using cloud-based systems, if your, let's say, baselines are not in place, the attacker doesn't even need your device in order to be able to access your SaaS applications, steal your data, or then basically drive even bigger impact. And in secure identity, obviously, multi-factor authentication, identity protection mechanisms, such as understanding when your signing method is at risk, or your user is at risk if your user credentials are stolen, for example. Conditional access policies that require a healthy user and a compliant device, for instance. And for those employees that need elevated permissions, utilizing something like privileged identities. Email, the number one attack vector nowadays. Obviously, understanding what are the secure email solutions. So link detonation, attachment detonation, or sandboxing, otherwise known as. Those need to be in place. They're never perfect. They never be perfect. They will never be perfect. This is why I need all those others, but those are very important to have in place. And obviously, having secure collaboration platforms, making sure that you cannot just have a Teams lobby bypass, for example, so that anyone can just join if you just happen to know the link. Endpoints, as mentioned, not only having that endpoint detection or antivirus in place, but also being part of a device management system, making sure that that device is hardened or compliant, so to speak, and running those updates and patches on a frequent basis. That's not a big deal to do at the end of the day. Secure network is important. Obviously, firewall, you need to showcase, even if in European Union, there's something called NIS2 regulation. There a lot of those requirements, depending on the country that you look at, have actually network security requirements. But I would say for the more modern organization is, the less important firewall actually becomes, surprisingly. And same comes with secure data. So secure data is interesting in a way that it's something that everyone understands, that yes, we need to understand what data is important, what data is not, files, databases, and those would need to be protected accordingly. Everyone understands that this is needed. However, it's a data governance problem for the most part. But one needs to have a solution in place depending on the industry. But this is an upcoming requirement that I see more and more when working with customers that are part of a supply chain. They are required to provide evidence that, hey, you have at least classified that the data that you receive from us does not go outside of SharePoint, for instance, outside of your organization, unless it goes to us. Things like that. I see more and more of these coming up. It's not really something that you will see like 9 out of 10 cases, but this is something that I'm sure is will be required more and more by bigger organizations towards their supply chain. So that's pretty much from my end in terms of the importance of cybersecurity, the core, let's say, elements or the core streams that, if covered, cover most of security requirements you might see from the from your customers, or even regulations, and also some ideas on individual technical capabilities that would need to be in place to actually start going towards that secure baseline. And with that, off to you, Joy and Juliana.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate that. That was some helpful insight that I hope everybody got something out of that. We are going to swiftly move on to our next speaker, Jack, who is going to share a bit more with us. So Jack, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joy, and thank you, Alex, as well for that insight too. So my name is Jack Duff, everybody. Love to meet you all. Thanks for having me. I'm a senior sales engineer at Huntress, who are a cybersecurity vendor and platform who work with managed service providers like Intelliworx to help manage your IT and better secure your infrastructure as well. And so today I've been given the pleasure to focus on two main sections, one which is real world scenarios. So what does it actually look like when a cyber attack happens against a small and medium sized business, whether it's in the UK or anywhere around the world? I'm going to break down how that attack looks, if you will, in kind of stages, because all we hear about usually are the headlines, right? This company was hit by this attack, and this is what happened. Very similar to what Alex mentioned with the M&S scenario recently. So I'm going to break down how that happens in a specific example, how they gain access, what do they do, etc. in there, and then what does it look like for the defenders on the ground, typically you guys and your staff, and possibly your managed service provider as well. And then what consequences does that have in the real world? And then the second section we'll go into later on is how do you really start to build a cybersecurity plan? So how do you start to earmark and classify what's important? How do you benchmark that as well, similar to Alex's baseline points that he made, and then a real world sort of plan, actual steps on how to get started doing that as well. Hopefully that should be really practical and real world focused and not kind of hypotheticals or marketing stuff there. So if we go on to the next slide, please, there on the attacker's playbook, I want to highlight something called a ransomware attack. Some of you may know what this is, some of you may not. Ransomware is a form of malicious software that is installed onto your devices, namely your PCs, your servers, your laptops, etc. there, with the aim to lock access to your data and then demand a ransom or a payment to get access to that data again, whether it's access or the actual copies of them again themselves. Lots of it in the news in the last 10 plus years. It's been around for a while now. And this table visualizes what we call the attack chain, if you will, from start to end here. This is an example of a ransomware attack against an organization. And I've split these into kind of three categories here. We've got phase, day and time, and details. So you get an idea of the timeline, like the length of time these kind of attacks go on for, what's involved in it, and what kind of phase that falls into. So hackers have these playbooks, these cyber criminals. Their actions fall in different phases, and the details are the kind of actions that they take here. And you'll see that it goes over kind of a 4-day period here, which could sound quite long to some people, but in real world aspects, that's very, very quick as well. Then in the last year or two, the average amount of time between ransomware being deployed on someone's endpoints by hackers and the encryption was 14 days, and that is creeping down very, very quickly as we find new variants and new cyber criminal groups that are out there. And that's something that Huntress researches and uses to better protect its clients as well there. So you'll see on day one there, the phase one there, is often part of one of those essential parts, like Alex was mentioning, is that you need to be able to deliver your malicious payload or somehow get access to the system that might have something of value on it to you as a hacker, right? And so this happens via spear phishing with an email with a malicious attachment there. So somebody has opened up an email and downloaded a malicious attachment, which might look normal, right, like a Word document or a PDF. Might direct them off to a website that looks normal, but it's been created by a hacker there to utilize social engineering to gain your trust and use psychology there to bypass your awareness. And they now have this attachment downloaded onto your machine there with macro enabled. Stage 2 is weaponization. So now they have that tool on your endpoint and they can now start to run a script, so an automation piece of software there, to install a rat, not the furry kind there, but a remote access Trojan, a type of virus there that's installed onto your endpoint. And that allows them to exploit, as you see there, and bypass a lot of security tools there. And they start, as you go through these stages here, that's all kind of day one. So they've already duped a user into downloading their tool onto their machine. They've already been able to bypass certain security tools by running scripts that are things that are run every day on your endpoint, on your PC there. And they're now starting to establish connections and whatnot. Even by the end of the morning on day one, we're looking at 11:21 a.m. command and control. They're now connecting back that PC that's been compromised to their own hacker network of servers to better manage and exploit that device there as well. And so they're able to then disable some tools there, which is the actions on objective sections. And we're moving into day 2, and they've already got their claws into that machine there. And the way in was through a human being, right? The human firewall, which is us when we're using our emails and whatnot for business, and they've been able to get through there. They start to then escalate their own privileges. So they have rights and access to other parts of the device. They use protocols to move around, like RDP, you'll see there 2/3 of the way down, which many of you may be aware of and even using. And then they're starting to exfiltrate, effectively download sensitive data from those endpoints, and then start to get, a double squeeze, if you will, of the orange, or more orange juice, as they say, to encrypt the data once they leave, and they have a copy of it anyway. So they're going to demand a ransom, and then they'll probably sell that extra copy on the dark web to people who want to use that to maybe extort other people, or it could be personal data on there that could be valuable to others out there as well. So they get twice the amount of cash for the same amount of data there as well. And that's then day 4. They deploy the ransomware, encrypts files, and you're then stuck, if you will. So across that whole space from day 1 at 9 a.m. to barely halfway through into day 4, 3.5 days, if you will, that whole infrastructure has been compromised, you've lost data, and you've suffered a ransomware attack there as well. So it highlights the importance of building a cybersecurity plan and establishing those essentials and a baseline to avoid this, and have tools and processes and people in place that intercept in one or of many of these kind of stages. So if we move on to the next slide, please, we'll then talk about how that looks practically as well. So the people on the ground, right, in here as well. So things that the defenders, your IT staff, or even yourself, if you're wearing multiple hats, might actually see on the ground there. Because hackers design these attacks to fly under the radar, right? As we saw on that previous slide, it was emails that look like they're coming from trusted sources. It's a Word document. We use Word documents all the time. You download it, it runs a macro, you don't even see that. And then everything they're doing is behind the scenes, and it's not in front of you like you're watching a video, right? So it'll be things like unusual activity account or login patterns you might see. So if you're an administrator and you can see logs, or you have alerts set up from endpoint detection tools there as well, or antivirus, you might start to see unusual behavior, if you will, that doesn't fit the norm, if you will. Logins from IP addresses that aren't the norm, data center providers there as well. People starting to access certain things that they really shouldn't, or events that are happening that you might get flagged up about, that might come through as well as that second point there on antivirus and endpoint detection I mentioned, and even performance issues. So you might start to notice with certain users who haven't mentioned it before, or multiple users, that they're experiencing slowdowns on certain servers, on their own machines as well there, certain web apps they use, and it might start to, raise questions, and people start to look into them. But the problem is, the challenge they face is that a lot of those tools there can cause alert fatigue, right? It's a huge volume of alerts. Sometimes they are false positives. False positives being things that it potentially could be dangerous, but then it turns out to not be, right? A lot of things that hackers do are normal everyday business IT operation things in certain worlds, but in other worlds they are used for illegitimate things, right? Like ransomware. Ransomware uses encryption technology to lock you out from your files. But a lot of industries use encryption to keep files and data confidential and safe, and not in front of the eyes they shouldn't be in. So hackers use those kind of tools to do that. So things can create false positives because they can be interpreted as legitimate or illegitimate, if you see. So they have that issue of filtering and triaging those alerts and figuring out what's real compromise and what's just genuine usage as well there. Limited visibility across complex environments. So you've got a lot of on-premise workloads. People are in distributed workforces in different offices. You're using SaaS-based sort of cloud applications like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, Dropbox out there as well. And that's hard to get a unified view of that as well. And the way to try and do that is get those alerts. But again, it creates that volume. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle there as well, unless you have those right tools and expertise. And when the chaos actually does happen, the attack goes forth, there's a communication breakdown. Who is responsible for what? You may not even be able to communicate, probably, if certain applications or systems are compromised, right? And so if there's no plan with that, then obviously you're a bit adrift at sea, right? Without a sail, or without an oar, without an engine. So the chaos gets inflamed with the fact that the processes and backups aren't there to carry on communicating and getting through the crisis, if you will. So obviously, off the back of all that, it's not a very positive user experience, right? At the end of it, it's not something you want to wish on anybody to go through as a business owner or an employee at one of these businesses. So confusion, frustration, you can't get access to systems, things aren't working properly. It impacts data operations and workflows there, which ultimately affects revenue, reputation as well there, which obviously keep the business afloat and growing, hopefully. And it obviously leads to those post-attack moments I like to highlight there, which are those things that we would all feel, right, after these kind of things happen. It may have never happened before, so you thought, well, I thought we had protections in place. I thought our IT guy handled that. We've lost X number of days now. I haven't been able to access my emails, or the e-commerce site hasn't been up anymore. People can't place orders. Our customers are calling, right? They're saying, what's going on? What is happening at your organization is happening in 2 hours. And if you can't fix it, we'll have to look somewhere else and start to diversify our options here. Well, you tell people, could we have prevented this? All these, what ifs, whens out there as well, which make it pretty tumultuous and then can be obviously quite painful and puts the business ultimately at risk as well there. So being on the ground is quite a chaotic and emotional experience there as well, which can be, avoided and prevented as much as you can with the proper planning and considerations in place. So moving on to the next slide, please, there as well. We'll then see those consequences in the real world, very similar to some of the stuff I've covered just now in the kind of post-attack moments and user experience. But as you can see, there's an immediate negative business impact. It's never looked positively in the media, right, as well, especially because we see these large providers, companies being hit by cyber attacks, M&S obviously recently, Harrods, and lots of other examples in the last recent decade or so. But as you can tell, it's because people can't run their businesses, clients can't use their services there, you lose productivity, you lose revenue, and you can't interact with those customers really in there as well. And obviously the financial implications, right? The revenue that is lost when people can't place orders, you can't take orders as well. And if it's a ransomware attack, people have to make those decisions, right? Obviously, the UK government recommends not to pay the ransom because it encourages this type of illegal behavior as well. And 2/3 of the time, you don't actually get access to your data again anyway, and they might have taken a copy of it. So it's a horrible situation there. So obviously, they demand you not to, but if you don't have the tools and things in place, some business owners consider it, right, which is just not the way to go and can be prevented with proper planning prior to this. So you have to look at that kind of the cost of the ransom versus the cost of actual recovery and remediation if you had those plans and tools in place as well, which can obviously be much, much cheaper to have that rather than pay a ransom of X number of Bitcoin, which could be in the hundreds of thousands and millions of pounds there. And then you've got to look at the Information Commissioner's Office as well, changing legislation, right? In terms of you could be up for potential fines or legal action if you suffer a data breach. Or you're not compliant with certain industry standards or GDPR, for example. If you haven't made the efforts to secure that infrastructure that's important to your business and those assets, then you could be up for a lot of damages there to yourself there. And reputation and trust, right? Customers then might look at alternative providers, alternative companies that might offer what you do, and then unless you have PR firms or experience in it, it's hard to dampen down and resolve some of that scrutiny that happens in the media or from regulatory commissions as well there. And obviously cause lots of long-term effects depending on the nature of your business there. A lot of people may take this to court further on down the line. There can be very lengthy processes with audits, inspections, and investigations there. And obviously it can put up premiums to protect yourself in the future if your business is still lucky enough to be afloat after one of these businesses, which doesn't always happen to most as well, especially in the SMB world rather than the large enterprise too. So if we move on to the next slide, please, we'll then look at, kind of hopefully saying it's not all doom and gloom, right? It doesn't mean, this will happen to everybody. And we can look at ways of building a plan and assigning out roles and responsibilities there to make sure that, we're making best efforts to prevent this as well. Business objectives and security objectives should go in tandem together, because without security, you can't achieve the business objectives that you want, which might be to be the #1 X type of company, or achieve operations in this country, or this amount of revenue. But you can't get there if you don't have a solid cybersecurity objective and policy alongside it as well to secure that, to allow that other objective to happen. And you'll see here from Bruce Schneier here as well, well-known cryptologist in the nerd space like myself, is that, as he mentions quite rightly, when looking at security management and risk management, it's not a one-time thing. It's not a checkbox exercise. It's a culture. It's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time thing and you're done. It's something that needs to be reviewed and changed, because, as many of you will know, businesses change all the time, right? You adopt new tools, you might acquire new companies, new staff members, you offer new services, you change suppliers, etc. And all those changes come with security considerations that don't just have blanket approval from the previous actions there as well. So security is not a product, but a process. Right? So moving on to the next slide, please, here. We'll then look at how do you get started, right? It's a bit daunting. Well, how do I just build a cybersecurity plan? I can't just scroll something on pen and paper and get going if I'm not experienced in doing that. And this is a nice kind of guide here to kind of walk you through some basic starter steps, if you will, on building that as well, if you aren't lucky enough to leverage people like Intelliworx and their consultants as well to do this with you. So #1, understand what you're protecting. We're going to go through all these kind of stages here one by one, but we'll start with understanding what you're protecting. You need to know what you have in order to protect it and how. Defining roles and responsibilities. So who is responsible for doing that kind of asset inventory, classification of the importance as well there, and who's responsible for making sure we review this on a regular basis as well. What new considerations are there to change to this, to how we protect these assets. Cover the core areas, make sure it's practical and proportionate. Not everybody is M&S or Kona or British Petroleum, right, out there as well. So we need to make sure it's proportionate to our business size and the time that we have as well, so that we know we're not trying to achieve perfection. We're trying to achieve what's best efforts and right for yourselves, and then testing it, keeping it alive, and some bonus extra points here on the end. So if we head on to point 1 on the next slide, please. We'll go through, obviously, we need to identify what assets you have, right? Assets being the data that you might interact with and store, the systems that you have. So if you have servers or virtual machines or PCs out there as well, do you use applications in the cloud, and what are they? Who has access to them? Do you store personally identified information, credit card information? Do you have your own intellectual property or IP, depending on the business that you are? All that stuff is critical, right? Identify everything you've got, and you can start to classify and categorize that based on the importance to the business, right? And that informs you to map out your digital environment that you have there as well. Be they those physical assets or those more virtual assets that you have, like cloud apps is all there, and your workforce as well there. So where are they? Are they in office? Do you work hybrid? Do you work remote? Because they all have implications and considerations for security, right, as well. You might have somebody in an office who sat behind multiple layers of security that are in there through networking, through firewalls, through security systems. But then when somebody works from home, does that extend there as well, right? If they go and connect to Starbucks, McDonald's Wi-Fi over there, or some dodgy public Wi-Fi in the cafe down the road, are they still protected? Potentially not, depending on the way you've got your systems, right? And that's a consideration to look at. So you need to assess the risk. What could go wrong if you didn't have access to any of those assets, or you didn't know where some of those digital assets were? What would the impact be if that wasn't available or confidential or integral and wasn't changed, depending on the data type that it is? And to look at it from a business perspective, so from your own position, this would be difficult for us because we couldn't do X as a business, but also from your customer side. I'm a customer of your business, and if you lost access to this data, or it was changed, or I couldn't access this service of yours, then this is what would happen to me, and this is how I would feel, or I would do as well, because one informs the other as well. So that's a great idea of getting a good lay of the land of what you're protecting, where things are, and what happens when it's not as it should be or taken away. So heading on to the next slide, please, as well there. The next most important point, right, is that we've gathered all this stuff up. We know where it is. We know how important it is, but we need somebody to own this, right? It's a project at the end of the day. It's an ongoing one, like we mentioned with that quote at the start. So you need an owner, right? Somebody needs to be accountable. Core principle in risk management is that everybody is responsible for security in an organization, in the same way that I'm not meant to share the password for my laptop on the open internet or on a post-it note I leave in the cafe. But owners are accountable at the end of the day for that data, being leadership and management, etc. So someone needs to do that to drive the plan, assign an owner. It's not a full-time job, right, as well. You've got other stuff to do, but somebody does need to have that as a priority as well there, and start to clarify roles. Who's responsible for things in normal operations, right, when there are security considerations, but also during incidents that might happen, right, in terms of if a certain system goes down, or certain access to data is lost, or data is corrupted, or something like that. Who's responsible for certain parts of that process? And it could be things like communications. It could be around the technical side of things. It could be around contacting insurance providers. It could be around PR as well, internal, external comms, lots of stuff. So obviously you're going to need to include key departments if you have them as well, right? Depending on the size of your business. So human resources, finance, legal. It's not just an IT thing. It's not just a single director's thing to own. You need multiple parts of the business there, because they'll understand who's responsible for certain databases, for certain staff members and assets, and why and how they're important, versus just yourself at the top that may not have that visibility on the day-to-day basis. So responsibility is shared, accountability is assigned, right? And as I mentioned there, leadership roles own the risk, and you need to align business cybersecurity together to make sure that you ensure the business goals as well, that they're achieved. So important key step there. But moving on to the next slide, please. We'll then cover the core areas, and referring back to that baseline side of things again here, you want to use standards that are already out there, created by experts, right? You don't want to decide your own baseline, of course, because it might not be your forte. You might specialize in another industry and vertical. So there are great frameworks out there to use as baselines that give you kind of key steps to kind of align what you've got and what you don't have, and identify gaps in your security policy or your security arsenal that you may have. Obviously, one of the core ones here, Alex mentioned it earlier, is UK Cyber Essentials, which is a government-backed cybersecurity certification for UK businesses, whether you work with government or not. It's for all businesses out there of all sizes, and it uses key technical controls to highlight some pillars of things that you should be doing to secure those assets as well and protect your business better. Things around having firewalls, patch management policies. We'll have updates on our Windows systems all the time, right? Making sure that we're controlling that those and our other third-party application software we use are also patched and up to date, as and when vendors push out new security patches to protect those pieces of software from being exposed and kind of exploited with new vulnerabilities. Multi-factor authentication, who has access to things as well. So I guess to highlight, what are you doing in that space now? If you don't have a firewall, if you don't enforce MFA, if you don't have a patch management policy and no access control, then those are all your areas to work on, right? According to the Cyber Essentials framework. So utilize that Their website is great for it. Lean on Intelliworx as well, who are certified in that as well. And again, it's UK government backed. It's very easy to understand as a starting baseline. So it's a good place to go first as any SMB owner, I would say. And it makes you look more credible as well, and it can help with things like cyber insurance, approvals and stuff. Another nice one we like to highlight is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF, here as well. Again, it's a high-level kind of gap identification. It uses key terms to kind of bucket or categorize the different layers needed involved in security with different tools and people and processes. They highlight that with identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. They're their core pillars, and you can align there what tools and processes and people do you have against those pillars, and where do you have the gaps there as well. We'll show on the next slide in just a moment what that kind of looks like as well. And here it is some of these pillars there, like you'll see. And the majority of what most of you will have there is in the protect stage, which is the second stage, really, of these kind of pillars. Identify is that start we were talking about, right, which is finding out what you've got. So the inventory management, what assets do you have? What risk is there? How important is one versus the other? And then protect is the second one that most of you probably will know in terms of security tools, things like antivirus, firewalls, multi-factor authentication, phishing, email filtering, all that. So that's where most budgets go today in terms of cybersecurity for businesses. But then a lot of what people should be looking at now, where those new threats are changing, the behavioral stuff that we showed with the ransomware attack, should be looking at the detect and recover phase as well there. Detect has things like endpoint detection response solutions, or EDR, the first bullet point there as well. Global threat feeds like cybersecurity providers like Huntress offer as well as part of our security operations center solution that Intelliworx uses. Respond is also that EDR part. It can take actions for you to secure the infrastructure in case there is hacker behavior found on that device, like a ransomware attack or others. And recover, some of you will know from backup solutions like tape drives or backup cloud solutions there as well. Or if you're lucky enough, disaster recovery plans and business continuity plans. Again, Intelliworx will be your go-to to ask questions about that. So as you can see, you can highlight quite quickly if you have something in place for each one of these pillars. If you don't, then it's time to talk to somebody about it and start building a plan around, which things would be included in terms of that protection. Different tools might need different security protocols and plans in place, and it starts helping you achieve a more solid cyber resilience position. So if we head on to the next slide, please, after this one, we'll then see the next part, which is the making it practical and proportional, right? We're not looking for perfection, right? Perfection is something that is almost an impossible standard to achieve in a lot of things, right, as well, subject to your personal opinion. But it needs to be proportionate to your business as well, right, out there. So obviously the first major thing in terms of practicality to do is document that plan and strategy in a clear, non-technical language so that everybody has accessibility to it as well, right? And that's what policies are. Policies are non-technical, they're high level, they give the direction and guidance and overall idea of what you guys are trying to achieve with your security in line with that business objective, which is to be the #1 provider of company of X. Therefore, to do that, we need a security policy to protect ABC things, because if we don't have them, we can't do the business goal over here, right? So it needs to be non-technical, and below that, you'll then have standards and procedures that start to come into the technical language as well in there too. And just a quick time check, everybody, 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll wrap up there with some Q&A. And then below that procedures there, you've got your there'll be the more sort of day-to-day administration of these security controls and tools there as well. And a real big one there, store it somewhere accessible, and remember to back it up as well. Do not just have one copy on a server. Make sure you have another copy somewhere else, maybe in public cloud, SaaS cloud storage, all that kind of stuff. And make sure the right people are the ones that have access to it as well, permissions-wise. So having those redundancies in place is very, very key. So next slide, please, after this. We'll then see after that, we need to obviously test it and keep it alive, right? And it's, as the pro tip here says on the right hand side, don't wait for a crisis, right? Because nothing ever goes to plan in a crisis, as they say there. So small scheduled updates are way better than a reactive overhaul as well. So even if it's once a quarter, you do a 30-minute review with those key people, contact lists. So who are those people responsible for what X, Y, Z in terms of overall strategy there, communications, reaching out to banking, insurance, HR, all that kind of stuff. And those incident response steps. What do we do in an incident? What's the first thing we do? Do we just call Intelliworx? Do we have our own internal IT that works with somebody as well? That can make a big difference to making sure that the plan goes smoothly and you make those adjustments. There's small adjustments when the real reactive situation happens as well there. So tabletop exercises are great for that, even if just for kind of 1 hour on a certain cadence that you can establish per quarter, per half year, per once a year, whatever it is. And then effectively you go through a discussion-based simulation of, okay, we're in a hypothetical cyber incident. These systems are down. This thing has happened. What do we do? And you kind of go, right, we'll follow our plan that we've built, right, with our help from Intelliworx or from other people internally. So it's usually the appointed cybersecurity plan owners that would review that plan. They might help establish those tabletop exercises, and they hopefully would review that on an annual basis or sooner if things change. Because as mentioned earlier, things change in businesses a lot. New tools, new people, new processes, new things. And if those things change, you should review that plan so you don't have those gaps or holes to say, didn't think to change it because this thing changed in the business. So yeah, after incidents, for example, or other changes like new offices, new policies, tech shifts, all that kind of stuff, they reveal those gaps and you can plug them in these moments there when you adapt the plan and better protect the business. So next slide, please. This should be the final one after test and keep it alive is the bonus slide, right? Because people go, great, Jack, wonderful. Thanks so much for getting me started, but sounds like a lot. How do I even get started, right? It's tough to say. All businesses are different. You all have different pressures and amount of time and bandwidth available to you as well there. But to give you guys a rough idea of how you get started, assuming a few key details prior to this, you could argue that over a 4 to 8 week period, part-time phased effort, it's not like a full-time 4 8 week thing. As that kind of plan owner and bringing in the right people involved in the business, you're not starting from scratch. You already have a few of those tools in some of those framework phases that we looked at earlier, like NIST, Cyber Essentials. You may have some basic policies in place about where people can work from, the strength of passwords, who has access to what, etc. Assuming that, and you use one of these frameworks to identify your gaps, and you carve out a few hours a week to work on it, then that 4 to 8 week period is a pretty good guideline, right, as well. But all businesses are different, so you can kind of set that as your objective, see where you are at that 8 week period after starting as well, and looping in the right people. Use that, as you can see, first week or two to identify what you have, the importance of things, what risk there is without it, what tools do you have and not have in there as well, against those frameworks. 3 and 4, start to write up that strategy, non-technical language, map it to the business objectives and needs. Again, it's high level at the top, it's your policy, and then start to create those core policies as you go down based on certain asset types there as well, passwords, access, certain servers, applications you have. What are they? Why are they important? What risk do they pose to business if something happens to them? And how do you protect them? And how do you respond in incidents? And you build that then incident response plan in 7 and 8 there as well, with other people's input on that too. So as said, prioritize clarity, prioritize what's right for your business. Perfection is not the goal. Use the resources that are out there, the frameworks, the experience of Intelliworx, for example, and ask for help where possible as well. We don't have to do this on our own as well, especially when it's not our specialism. So hopefully that gives you all a good idea and good resources on where to identify what gaps you may have and avoid potentially damaging cyber attack in the future, or mitigate it as best possible. So, and with that, I'll hand back over to Joy as well there, where I believe we're going to open up the floor to a bit of Q&A as well there, and myself and Alex will chime in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doc. That was so practical and informational. So I really appreciate you sharing the insights on that. Yeah, we have a few questions, and just a reminder for those of you attending, if you want to at any time put a question in the chat or in the Q&A section, we will try to get to those in the few minutes that we have left. But I'll start off with a question kind of to both of you. How do you get non-technical teams like HR or finance to actually care about cybersecurity?
Jack,
Let's go. Yeah, sure. I was going to say let's go alphabetical, but otherwise I'll feel free. I'll go ahead straight away. Yeah, it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge because it's not there every day to day, right? HR is not focused on finance, right? It's not their MO to do that. So I think it's worth you know establish a meeting with those relevant people and highlight those questions to them, kind of like being in HR, being in finance, what is the core core facets of your operation that you do every day. It might be finance, we're accounts payable, we use QuickBooks, we use XYZ. HR needs to make sure certain data is safe. You can communicate with certain employees there. And you start to highlight in a cybersecurity vein, well, say, for example, we were compromised and this couldn't happen there as well. What would the implications be to finance and HR and the wider business? You start to make them realize that they hadn't considered those risks that are out there and that we maybe don't have plans to mitigate against them and that we need their input to better allow them to do their job and protect the company as a whole as well. I think that's a way it paints the picture for them as well. What's important for them when it's no longer available to them, and we need their expertise in driving how to better protect it.
Right, thanks.
Yeah, I would maybe add a little bit to that. So I think everything that Jack said, yes, absolutely. However, it's important to also have the, let's say, leadership support. This is much easier in smaller organizations because those are usually very flat. But unless there's leadership support that Jack mentioned beforehand, it will not fly because everyone has their job to do. Well, we never got hit before. Why should we now? We shouldn't be that interesting for the adversaries anyway. Those are the kind of your typical responses that you get if you have unmotivated organization, which typically happens quite often. But at least to when communicating with them, use case based is the most important thing. So think of it from there. What would the impact would be for them when introducing security controls, not talking about the security controls, but how would that impact their daily life, whether there would be user experience change, and basically trying to figure out how to, let's say, minimize that user experience while covering the risk, and selling that user experience change through reduction of risk of what may happen, what would have happened.
Great, thanks. Both great answers. I will direct this question to you, Alex. We've got a question that says, like obviously we've seen how attackers operate. What's one thing that defenders overlook that could actually make a big difference?
Defenders overlook.
Often overlook. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if I were to put one thing, I think there's a big over reliance on technology at this point of time. There's so much marketing involved in selling tech that it comes across like buy this box and you're secure. And I can say that there's nothing more, let's say, risky than having a false sense of security because you have invested in a tool. I think this is where the biggest, let's say, what defenders overlook. They are solely reliant on what they have purchased without understanding what they have purchased or why is it purchased for. 9 out of 10 technologies that you purchase, they need to be configured accordingly based on your, let's say, your environment, based on your risk appetite. And if not, chances are that you're only leveraging pieces of that technology without even let's say, without understanding the bigger picture, and then that would result in an incident. That's maybe the biggest from my end. Jack, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, for sure. It's the things they overlook a lot as well. I say I work a lot with managed service providers globally and with small and medium-sized businesses. And a big thing that I think people overlook, whether they do or don't work with managed service provider, is actually outsourcing that expertise or sort of going to other people and leveraging their experience and their knowledge to help them better defend that organization. If you don't have one, you're reticent to go outside your sphere and ask for expert help or say, whether if it's one-off consultancy or if it's an ongoing managed services contract for cybersecurity services or IT or whatever. I think they're reticent to because you think, well, that's my job and I'm going to give that away, if you will. But a lot of these providers work in tandem with you, I find. And often if you do use a managed service provider or an outsourced IT or security provider, you're probably not leveraging it enough as well. The communication channels probably aren't as robust as they should be. Joy, you probably see examples of it, right? In terms of people who are like, this is the first time I've spoken to someone for a while, and you're like, well, definitely, Intelliworx make that effort to reach out, and it should be reciprocal as well, because they could be helping you adjust things like these cybersecurity plans, identify those gaps to create new projects for you, and better protect the business and overall achieve that business aim as well.
Yeah, great.
Just
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah, go ahead.
just to add one thing, and something to add to Jack's point. I think also another thing is that oftentimes defenders think that once you have established something, it is static, but IT is almost never static. You bring in new technologies, for example, AI-based technologies that need to have completely different security configuration or new security configurations one is not most likely aware of, although paying for the technology to be in place. And then this is one thing that we overlooked, that once our security baseline or security posture was good a year ago, 2 years after, no one had even take a look at, well, how did our environment change? And this is something that one needs to have a conversation with themselves and their organization on a frequent basis in order to adjust those security baselines in accordance to how the IT has lived on, so to speak.
Yeah. Great. Thank you both. Yeah, I think that that's true, even just of like using the technology and relying on the experts of that technology and having those conversations with your IT service providers and knowing that they know how to use those technologies and apply them correctly to your environment. So, yeah, that's really important. I want to honor the time, so we have ran out of time, but I did just want to thank you all for coming, and thank you, Jack and Alex, again for speaking today and providing us a lot of practical and important feedback. For those of you attending, we will be in touch regarding the free phishing simulation that you probably saw when you signed up for this webinar. So keep an eye out on your inbox. We would love to chat with you just about your cybersecurity and how we can maybe help be a part of making it a more successful part of your business. So, yeah, other than that, I will go ahead and end it here. But thanks again and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye for
Bye.
now.
Bye.